The anointing of David and the beginning of his kingly reign. The psalmist's ode of jubilation over God's steadfast love. St. Paul's heartfelt letter to the church in Corinth, and Jesus' awkward return to his hometown and his calling of the 12. Chances are we have all heard these scriptural moments more than once. Indeed, our lectionary had us considering these very same readings exactly 3 years ago. Yet none of us are exactly the same as we were 3 years ago. Some things stay the same, and some things don't. And so, in this way, we might hear a familiar passage of the Bible differently today than we have in the past. In fact, one of the things I've come to love as a disciple is the comforting cycle of the church year, of settling into each liturgical season and letting myself fall ever deeper and deeper into its stories and lessons and meaning in my life right now. That and coming around full circle over and over to the same seasons, yet hopefully changed by the grace of God year after year, time and again. Indeed, Christian formation is a lifelong process. Through word, worship, ministry, and service, it seeks to lead all God's people to an ever-deepening relationship with God and an ever-maturing faith and life of discipleship. Each liturgical season may not always look or feel the same each time, but they are always there waiting for us, waiting to welcome us into a new season of our lives. Our reading from 2 Samuel recalls just such a new season for the tribes of Israel. The passage signals the new reign of David as king, a time of transition to a new way of doing things, a change from how Saul had ruled, that is, over the people by power and might, to how David will, by leading them like a shepherd king. Something similar is going on in Psalm 48, a change from the way things were to something else. The psalm is attributed to the sons of Korah. Unlike their father, who abused his high position and questioned God, they humbly serve God in the temple day after day. While this family has changed over time, God has not. This God is our God forever and ever. Psalm 48 beautifully portrays the immutable loving kindness of God, reminding us that we can always seek and find refuge in God's unchanging always-there-ness. So too does the secure city of Zion serve here as a metaphor for God's towering love, protection, and guidance from one generation to another. Some things stay the same, and some things don't. We can say forever and ever about God in a way that we cannot say it about anything else. But it's the anything else that so often occupies our mortal thoughts and human worries, isn't it? People don't like to talk about change very much. Our brains seem to be hardwired to focus on the way things have always been. But that is what I want to talk about this morning, change. And before you freak out, let me just say that I use that word in its most redemptive of meanings. I neither mean to imply that change is simply inevitable or uncomplicatedly easy, only that we ought to hope for change, real change, with all our hearts. Change is, as Sister Joan Chittister writes, biological and social, internal and external, of our own making and beyond our control. Psychology tells us that change carries us from every stage of our life to the next one. Indeed, if we're lucky, nothing will stay the same, but rather be constantly transformed in the spirit of possibilities and new beginnings and the coming of the kingdom of heaven on earth. Ours is a God of creation, after all, of making all things new, the God who says over and over again, I will do a new thing, and then does. A new covenant, a new earth, a new heaven, new songs of praise on our lips, even new hearts put within us, hearts of stone replaced with hearts of flesh. I think the response to change, or having been changed, or hoping for change, is at the heart of each of this morning's readings, along with discipleship and witness, and the vulnerability required to do all three: the strength of weakness, the power of change, and the grace of growth. For most of us, the notion of strength in weakness just makes no sense. Most of us probably do anything we can think of to conceal our weaknesses. They make us feel, vulnerable. But we would do well to remember that St. Paul wrote that portion of the epistle in response to those in Corinth who, in short, thought they might make better apostles than him. No one was calling him little Polly, the tent maker's son. They did not grow up together in the same town, as is the case in the gospel scene of Jesus returning to his hometown. But they were calling Paul a braggart. And surely between the lines they were recalling his former name, Saul, the pious Pharisee, the self-righteous zealot, who he used to be before everything about his life changed. The Paul who breathed out threats of murder against the Lord's disciples and sought to imprison them, or worse, the Paul who approved of the stoning of Stephen. We hear from a very different Paul this morning, one who has been changed by the grace of God, one who has turned completely around from former things and set his eyes on a more glorious vision, one who understands that when the Spirit knocks you to the ground and picks you up off the dusty road you once were on and forgives your past and gives you a mission and sets your eyes on what is to come, you follow that call with determination and everything you have. A Paul who understands some things stay the same, and thanks be to God, some things don't. One who knows not only the power of change, but the power of forgiveness, the grace of redemption, and the strength of salvation. That strength and power and grace is called into question by the listeners gathered in this morning's gospel of Jesus, the homeboy, returning to the place of his childhood as a grown man. Who does he think he is, they wonder? A prophet? That's the carpenter, Mary's kid from down the block, for goodness sake. Jesus did not ride into his hometown triumphant. He was putting himself in a very human, vulnerable position by returning to the site of his previous rough-hewn life and prophesying in the synagogue that the reign of God was present and that everyone was invited to participate in it, that the kingdom of heaven had come near, and he was it. Now we know that Jesus is more than a carpenter, more than just anyone's son, more than a poor kid from a poor family from a poor backwater town, but that is who his neighbors saw him as. His childhood, his circumstances, his profession, his social standing, his lot in life. Even though Jesus by then had already been baptized by John, wrestled with his own demons in the wilderness, and emerged from that wilderness a changed man, having discerned his true ministry, a ministry that is still unfolding and changing the world to this very day. He returned to his hometown after doing miraculous things, after stilling the waters of a stormy sea, after healing a woman who had hemorrhaged for 12 years, after raising a young girl from the dead. But those gathered to hear him speak in this morning's gospel are only more than willing to ensure that Jesus does not forget just exactly who he was in their minds, to put him in his place. Say what you want, boy, but we remember where you came from, who you really are. Anyone who's ever attended a family gathering as an adult or a high school class reunion knows of what I speak. We may be 20 or 40 or 60 or older, but get together with siblings and family or classmates, and we're all still someone's kid brother or big sister, the oldest, the baby, the class clown, the dunce, the teacher's pet. We are not who we were yesterday or last year, or 35 years ago, or even when we were kids. Nevertheless, that is too often how we treat each other. We tend to see each other not as who we are right now or even might become, but who we once were. The bastard son of a poor carpenter, the self-righteous Pharisee sitting in judgment and holding a stone in his hand. When really, we ought to be witnessing change, validating growth, always imagining bigger and better things for ourselves and each other. Instead, we hold on to past behaviors and then define each other by them. Except people change. In fact, we are marvelously made to. God gives us the amazing capacity to learn and grow and become our whole lives long, and even beyond that. The good news is it's not about staying the same or the way things were. It's about becoming new and seeing each other anew every day. What's true for us individually remains true for us communally, for we are not the same church as we were 50 or 25 or 10 years ago. We aren't even the same church as we were a year ago. If pandemic taught us anything, it is that we ought never again take for granted the privilege of gathering together as disciples, as Christian community. That and the fact that we are capable of changing, of adapting, of readjusting our expectations of how we do things in order to ensure that our lives remain centered on the one constant, the one thing that never changes, God, in whose eternal changelessness we rest, even in the midst of life's changes and chances. The real question is, what kind of church is God calling us to become here and now? This morning, we join our voices with the psalmist who sings, "This God is our God forever and ever." We sing because not only is God steadfast and unchanging, but also because God has given us the ability to grow, to become. God has given us the gift of newness and the ministry of change. And we sing because the gift of change isn't just for the church so that we may grow and prosper, but ultimately for all of creation, that the promise of a new heaven and a new earth might be fulfilled. Not the same earth, the way it always was, but a new creation, totally transformed. This ministry of becoming, with all the cost and joy of discipleship, as the theologian Walter Brueggemann has noted, is urgent among us, as urgent as it is wondrous and difficult and amazing and disconcerting. In other words, change isn't easy. It requires risk and vulnerability. It requires us releasing the notion that we are independent, powerful, and in control. Not so, God says to St. Paul, and to you and to me. We are meant to be dependent on each other and on God. My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. I have to believe that it is also not a coincidence that Paul writes about weakness and vulnerability in the same breath as relating the story of his spiritual experience of paradise, of earth transformed into heaven. For there is something that rings especially true in this pairing of weakness and revelation, that the more vulnerable we allow ourselves to become, the more we allow ourselves to open to the presence of God. And it is, my friends, in that presence where we will always, always find our greatest strength.